what we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in his place. The International Soviet shall be the human race. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in his place. The International Soviet shall be the human race. We once look condescending saviors to rule us from a judgment hall. We workers ask not for their favors, let us consult for all. To make the fleetless scorches booty, to free the spirit from your cell. We must ourselves decide our duty, we must decide and do it well. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in his place. The International Soviet shall be the human race. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in his place. The International Soviet shall be the human race.
Wake up, everybody, no more sleeping in bed. No more backward thinking, time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what it used to be. There is so much hatred, war and poverty. Oh, wake up all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say. 'Cause they're the ones who coming up and the world is in their hands. When you teach the children, teach them the very best you can. Hey, the world won't get no better if we just let it be. Oh, the world won't get no better. We gotta change it, yeah, just you and me. Wake up all the doctors, make the old people well. 'Cause they're the ones who suffer and who catch all the hail. And they don't have so very long before their judgment day. So don't you make them happy before they pass away. Oh yeah, wake up all the builders, time to build a new land. I know we can do it if we all in the hand. The only thing we've gotta do is put in our minds. It's the only thing to work out, oh they do every time. Hey, hey, the world won't get no better.
We want to change the world, and being part of a community that wants to change the world and not out there just isolated and doing your individual cases, I think is critical for people's feelings of well-being, for feeling they're accomplishing something, and for being able to carry on in difficult times.
I need a little help, I can't do it alone. I need a little help, y'all, I can't do it alone. Oh.
Hello, I'm Theda Jackson Mao, CCR's Director of Development. I'm so happy to welcome you, CCR's freedom fighting friends who have been touched by Michael. Thank you for joining us today to discuss Michael's legacy and his just published autobiography, Moving the Bar. Today, guests are joining from around the country and overseas: Arizona, California, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., Florida, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Montana, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Oregon, Washington State, and Canada, Germany, and the United Arab Emirates. I hope you enjoyed hearing the Internationale, Michael's favorite song. It was written by French revolutionary Eugene Potier during the first socialist uprising of modern times and became an anthem of the international working class. A couple of housekeeping items. Joining us today is graphic recorder extraordinaire Abby Van Mugen. From time to time, she will share with us a visual representation of today's conversation. Please post questions at any time in the Zoom Q&A. Post in the chat if you need technical support, and we are recording this event. CCR is especially grateful for your support in these extraordinary times when the fight for social justice has placed additional urgency on our long-standing cases and projects. Couple that with our work to stop new assaults on threatened communities, and the Center's legal advocacy and communications work has swelled to unprecedented proportions. If you are not already a CCR donor, I invite you to go to our website and support the Michael Ratner campaign for the next generation by joining our Justice Sustainer monthly giving program. There is a link in the chat. We are giving away a copy of Moving the Bar to all new Justice Sustainers who join by July 16th. Now, it's my great pleasure to turn it over to my boss, CCR Executive Director Vince Warren.
Thank you so much, Theda, and thanks everyone for joining us today to celebrate Michael and everything that he's meant to the work, everything he's meant to CCR, and you'll hear what he's meant personally to some of the folks that are speaking today. So I'm very happy that I'm going to be hearing from, like you, wonderful longtime friends and colleagues, Ellen Yarashevsky, a former staff member, a former board member, an all-around CCR advocate that's done extraordinary work in her own right, Bahar Azmi and Rachel Miracle, both of whom are currently at CCR and doing tremendous work. And I think that we've all benefited from all that Michael has given us and given to the field. I wanted to start off with by saying that the book that I hope you all will get a chance to read, Moving the Bar, is an extraordinary life story. It's sweeping in scope. It covers easily 50 years of stories that many of you have heard, but in context that many of you have not. And it reads like Michael. When I read it, I felt like Michael was in the room with me, and it added such depth and breadth and context to the work that Michael had done. It's hard to put into words what Michael meant to me and what he meant to us, but there's the part of Michael that's, I think, important for the world, which is that he was a fierce lawyer, a brilliant political strategist. And for me personally, and people that got a chance to work with him, just a wonderful human being, family first, caring and loving. Was one of those guys who was hard as nails on the outside and super soft on the inside. And the great thing was that he never let the government or the state see that softness. All that they saw was steely determination for justice. And I've known Michael since 1999 when I joined the board at CCR. 7 years on the board working together, and then 10 years as executive director. And it was not lost on me at all that in hiring me and entrusting me, the Center for Constitutional Rights, to the leadership that I was bringing, that it was a very perilous and risky and hard thing to do, given all of the tremendous work that he had done. And when I was reading Moving the Bar, one of the chapters, the pieces that resonated with me, which I hope you'll get a chance to read, is the incredible work that Michael did on the first Guantanamo cases. We'll be hearing about the second set that we're still litigating, but the first set with respect to Haitians who had been fleeing Haiti after the overthrow of the coup that overthrew Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And amongst the great things in that story, he talks about how other organizations were very tepid in how they wanted to push the administration. At the time, when Bill Clinton became president, there was outside of CCR a sense that we didn't want to rock the boat. We didn't want to make the Clinton administration look bad. Michael never took that view, and Michael told them before anything happened, he said, you know, you can be as soft as you want on this guy. He's not going to do a thing for us. And Clinton did it. And Michael tells a story about how he was sitting next to Bill Clinton at a fundraiser, talking to him about what was needed in order to release hundreds of Haitian people that were detained in essentially an HIV prison camp at Guantanamo. And he said that Bill Clinton dutifully took notes and gave him that Bill Clinton look like, yes, I'm going to talk to my people about this, and did absolutely nothing. And reading that, it reminded me of a few years into my time at CCR. I got a call from the White House. I was at a Mets game in 2009, and I was summoned to the White House to talk about Guantanamo and to talk about torture. And Michael was visibly nervous about this. I think he was concerned that that CCR wouldn't be hard enough on Obama, that CCR would be accommodating like a lot of the other human rights organizations. And looking back on the history of Michael's relationship with power, his unrelenting resistance and demands for justice, I can see that turning over that baton would be very difficult, because if I hadn't been there, it would have been Michael in the room with President Obama. When I went into the president to meet with the president and other human rights groups, I had Michael in the front of my mind and let him have it, to the shock and chagrin of a lot of people in the room. But that's what CCR stands for. It's about fighting that power. It's not about making friends with power. And I think, and coming out of that meeting, Michael told me how nervous he had been going in, but he was really happy with the way that I handled it, and was very happy with the way that CCR was moving forward. And that's the kind of person that Michael was. We didn't agree on anything. I don't think anybody on this call is going to tell you that they agreed with Michael on everything. But the thing that people do agree on is that he managed to put the political context of the day at play front and center, the radical politics in the litigation through a non-radical forum, which is the federal court system. So I'm really excited to turn it over to my colleagues to tell some stories about Michael from their perspective. Before I do that, I want to introduce Abby Van Nugent, who is, as Theda mentioned, doing graphic representation, a wonderful artist doing graphic representation of this conference, of this discussion. So Abby, can you share your screen and sort of let's see where we are? Look at this, wow. I didn't know I was talking that much. It's incredible. Yeah, so this is going to continue. Thank you so much, Abby. This is going to continue as she's going to continue working as we're talking live. So we have a lot to look forward to be able to not only have this discussion, but to be able to share it and to treasure it for years to come. And with that, I would like to turn over to my dear friend and my dear colleague, Ellen Yaroshevsky.
Thank you so much, Vince, for those remarks. And thank you for your leadership of CCR. I know that Michael would be totally proud of all that you do and have done. So I started at CCR almost 40 years ago. I was lucky to be hired as a staff attorney and worked with Michael there for 6 years, then served with him on the board of CCR and worked together in the National Lawyers Guild. He was a cherished friend, among the most loyal and generous of people I know. Shortly after I got to CCR, I worked with Michael and a group of lawyers that he led on the Sanchez-Espinosa case. This was a challenge to the United States sending Contras to defeat the Sandinista revolutionary government in Nicaragua, where they killed and maimed so many people. And of course, we knew that it was highly unlikely we'd get past a motion to dismiss. But that case, like so many others that Michael actually organized, were used to advance organizing against the Reagan administration attacks on Nicaragua, much like other cases as well. It's just one example of what Jules Lobel later termed success without victory, using law as a tool for social change. We would write lengthy affidavits about the contras and really pointed briefs that were for public consumption as much as they were for the courts. This was the early days of using international law. There were very few lawyers who did that. And CCR had pioneered such human rights work through Peter Weiss and Rhonda Copeland, who had won a groundbreaking case called Filartica v. Pena that established the right to sue under the Alien Tort Claims Act for a serious violation of international law. And working on that case gave me a window into Michael's deep connection to struggles in Central and Latin America, a window into his respect for people, because Dolly Filartica wasn't just a case name. She was a person who often came to our office following Rhonda and Peter's work, and Michael would stop whatever he was doing to spend time with Dolly. It seemed like every Nicaraguan and Salvadoran movement leader was either at Michael's house, on the phone, or in his office. He built up such trust and admiration from people involved in those struggles that congressional delegates and staff people, especially Congressman Dellums, would call when a political issue arose about Central America. They'd call and they'd say to Michael, what should we do? What legal hooks do we have to advance the cause? And his connection to the people on the ground was deep and it was constant. It was remarkable to see him with our lead plaintiff, Dr. Myrna Cunningham, who was a doctor in Nicaragua. And it was clear that there was not only such deep respect between them, but a real friendship. Watching him talk with her about her organizing strategy, assisting her with her national tour, Michael was humble, he was strategic, and it just embodied his role as a people's lawyer, helping to use that law as a tool for social change. We seemed to work constantly on that. It was the pre-internet era. Law was only in books. We didn't have computers that had law on it. And so we went to libraries. And thank goodness Michael had a deep knowledge of the law and its nuances. It was quite remarkable. And with help from our team of 3 much younger lawyers, he'd produce a brief, a motion for a temporary restraining order, hundreds of documents, stay up all night. It was really fun for him. He loved this work and he was passionate about it. He would show up in the morning to start his day after his morning run with his coffee in hand, and he'd start ribbing all of us about our social engagements the night before, who we were with, where'd we go. He would tell juvenile jokes, many of which would be inappropriate today. Work was fun, it was all consuming. Michael was often curious about what we were reading, or at least it seemed that way. He would use an entree into sharing what he was reading and say, well, I'm reading a book called Antlers in the Treetop. And we'd look at him, we'd say, hon, he'd say, it was by Goose to the Moose. And it was like another, okay, Michael, we would in unison go, Michael, enough, stop it. It was one of his many jokey juvenile pieces that he would share with us. He inspired passion in all of us as he exuded passion for the people who are often at great personal risk for their involvement in their political groups. And as Vince said, he understood power, he understood the need to challenge it. Wherever he confronted an injustice, Michael's view was you had to stand up, you had to speak out. In 1984, I was on a delegation to Cuba with him and other National Lawyers Guild leaders. And it was clear that he was the de facto leader that the Cubans looked to. He had a long history of supporting Castro's Cuba. We met all the major government leaders, and Michael was known, he was respected, not only in Cuba, but throughout the progressive world in the Caribbean and in Latin America. His lived experience was political and personal support for so many international human rights movements and activists. It was in his bones. After 9/11, when we were all shell-shocked, more than 100 National Lawyers Guild members gathered in a venue in Lower Manhattan. Michael was the speaker. What I most remember is that Michael too said he was shell-shocked and he wasn't sure what to say. But what he did say is, I have no idea what we can expect from the government, but there will be a lot of repression and attack on people's rights, especially Muslims and Arabs, and we need to stand up to that. He also talked about his love for family and to keep those we love close to us. And of course, he was right about all of that. As soon as the Gitmo issue arose, as Vince said, he knew we had to take it on despite the odds. He always operated on principle. I was fortunate to be his friend and spend time with him and his family at their home in the city and in the Catskills. We shared meals, weekends in the country. I got to see his love of fly fishing, his house full of animal skulls, hiking, spending time with family and friends, talking, arguing about politics. He was intellectually curious. He loved history. It was all part and parcel of how he was a true internationalist. Friends and compatriots from all around the world would gather and mingle with his family, all amid some of the most serious discussions of movement organizing. Nevertheless, he'd continue to tell these juvenile jokes. My husband and I are lucky that his wife, Karen Ranucci, allowed us to join their Catskill world, and we now live in a house that Karen and Michael own, a short walk away from the huge rock in the woods where his ashes are buried. I hike up to it several times a week, and I see his smiling face in a portrait on a rock, and beneath it, the Ella Baker quote, "We who believe in freedom never rest." Michael taught us freedom, justice, always takes a fight, the CCR motto. Michael loved Che, he loved Sandino, he loved brave revolutionary heroes. He loved the Che quote, "At the risk of seeming ridiculous, let me say that the true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love." That was Michael. He taught us to be guided by love, by humor, and respect for all people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It was a wonderful, wonderful tribute. And let's, Abby, can you share your screen? And let's see how we're progressing. And while that's happening, Ellen, I just want to thank you for, amongst the many people that you talked about, for raising Dr. Myrna Cunningham, who I did not have the privilege to know, but a story that is connected to Michael's friendship and relationship with her is that many years later, in our very stuffy 6th floor conference room with no windows, thank you very much, there was a picture of Myrna Cunningham on the wall, and we were in a meeting with a bunch of different advocates from all over the place, and one person I looked at, a woman, and she looked a little stricken, and I said, "Is everything okay?" And she pointed to the picture of Dr. Cunningham, and she said, "That's my mother." And to this day, Monica, who's Myrna Cunningham's daughter, has been deeply supportive of CCR and the work that we've been doing beyond that. And so Michael's legacy is carried on intergenerationally. Thank you so much, Abby. And we're going to be hearing from Bahar Azmi next, who will talk about his experiences with Michael and perspective. Bahar?
Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Ellen. I am going to focus on Michael's remarkable leadership in the post 9/11 era and responding and leading CCR and the entire political bar and responding to a number of the human rights atrocities committed by the Bush administration. As Ellen noted, he rightly predicted, and close with some personal recollections. I'm the legal director of CCR, and it's in that position, one that Michael held before. Got to know Michael really well, his incredible brain, but also his beautiful and supportive heart and soul, which he brought to his work, and his collegial and family relationships, and is such an inspiring model about how to be present in the world, even when fighting really hard battles. So I'm going to tell briefly a really complicated story, but an iconic story about Michael and his work, the story of Guantanamo, and how he recognized, as Ellen said, despite the horrific tragedy of 9/11, he lived in the West Village, where you could, I know you could still smell the embers of the fallen towers. He knew, as a political lawyer he was, the reflexive and destructive and durable force of U.S. militarism and malicious force of U.S. militarism. And so November 13th, 2001, when he read in the New York Times about Military Order Number 1, which authorized the use of military trials for suspected terrorists. He saw the first actualization of what he knew would be a long road of repression, and vowed to jump into action with the then legal director Bill Goodman and a number of CCR staff. And it wasn't apparently an easy thing for the staff to commit to. CCR is, as a movement organization, typically works with aligned groups whose politics we agree with. And we knew nothing about these individuals, suspected terrorists as they were called. But he really rallied the organization, invoking CCR's failure to work on the Central Park 5 cases, among other things, and his prediction about this being one first and central step in a broad landscape of repression. And this is what he said about why he felt we had to act. This is his writing. The president's claim that he had unlimited and unchecked power to combat terrorism was by far the most serious threat to human rights in the post 9/11 world. It was of a different character than the granting of more powers to the CIA and FBI, of the kind he had regularly challenged before that Ellen talked about. The president, under the military order, was claiming that he had the authority to arrest and detain people forever. This claim to unlimited detention power undercuts the key principle underlying democracy, the principle that authority, be it the president, the prime minister, or king, is under law. And I think he would add that absent law, what prevails is power, discretion, will, and that bad things happen in dark places. He also suspected that Guantanamo would be a source of this detention power, and he knew that because, as Vince described, as a political lawyer, he understands how power works and had deep experience. He was involved in the liberation of hundreds of HIV positive Haitian refugees who the US interned in Guantanamo in the early 90s on the same theory he knew that the Bush administration would deploy. As foreigners held on foreign soil, they enjoyed no rights whatsoever. So when the names of certain British and Australian detainees came to him through connections CCR had in the international human rights community, he did something not reckless, but arguably fruitless at the time, along with a couple of other death penalty lawyers, filed the first habeas corpus petitions challenging indefinite detention in Guantanamo on behalf of suspected terrorists. They didn't know they had lawyers. He intervened on behalf of their family members. And this was in February 2002, just months after 9/11. No other NGO would support CCR. We even had trouble finding local counsel. It was so controversial. But as Ellen said, he did the filing 100% on principle, and certain he would lose. But his goal was, as his colleague and dear friend Jules Lobel would put it, this act was an act of dragging politics into the classroom. Politics into the courtroom. An act of forcing a political conversation through a legal construct. And that he did, such that by 2004, when the arrogance of the Bush administration really came to fore, some of the failings of the Iraq War became present, the Supreme Court finally sided with Michael and declared that detainees had a right to challenge their detentions, and fundamentally that they're in a constitutional democracy. The king could do wrong, and there could not be prisons beyond the law. And thereafter, Michael did something very interesting. Michael and CCR did something very interesting. This is very consistent with his philosophy of lawyering. He did not, like some NGOs, try and hold on to these cases and claim credit. He and a number of CCR lawyers fanned out and recruited at first a core set of lawyers, including myself, and then an increasing number of lawyers, hundreds and hundreds of lawyers, ultimately representing all 779 detainees in Guantanamo. And this is this democratization of resistance that was really powerful. We called ourselves the Guantanamo Bar Association. And under his leadership, one commentator called this the greatest mass defense effort in US history. And we still, of course, are litigating this work. He wouldn't be surprised that the struggle has taken almost 20 years. If I could just share just a couple of personal reflections. I learned of Michael Ratner's passing on a day I had to travel to Richmond for a case. And it was really challenging for me personally because I couldn't be with my CCR colleagues who were gathering in person to commune around their love of Michael. But I was actually there with a purpose. I was arguing an appellate case that Michael brought to CCR in 2003 on behalf of torture survivors in Abu Ghraib, who were suing an odious private military contractor for torture. And the case was whether or not torture was lawful or not, an essential Michael Ratner case. And in the morning when I got up to argue, I was very anxious and decided to do a twist on the traditional conservative introduction to a case. And I said, may it please the court, and in honor of a heroic human rights lawyer, Michael Ratner, who passed yesterday, my name is Bahar Azmi. And I thought what I was doing at that moment is what Michael did for so many hundreds of victims of human rights atrocities all over the world. I was trying to bring his dignity and his presence into the courtroom. And then the night before in my hotel room, I had the duty of informing the Guantanamo Bar Association that our beloved Michael Ratner had passed. And I'd like to share with you what I shared with all of them. Having the immense privilege of working with Michael for over 12 years on the Guantanamo cases and as legal director at CCR, I can say he was the most visionary, principled, strategic, fearless, passionate, and deeply humane and humble advocate I have ever come across and likely ever will. I almost cannot comprehend how someone can be so vigorous in his challenge to power and yet so sweet and generous and unassuming, except to say that in his private life, he modeled the broader world he wanted to see, one driven by love and kindness and respect for human dignity. To me and to so many others of his generation, and especially the countless young lawyers and activists at CCR and beyond, that he sought to mentor generously and unselfconsciously, Michael Ratner was a hero. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Bahar, that really very moving tribute. And I also remember very well that argument and how you started it. I put it in the chat. It was really one of the most extraordinary things that I've heard. Abby, can you share your screen and let us let us see what we just heard, perhaps? And while that's happening, I would also say that tributes to Michael were probably the things that made Michael the most uncomfortable in life. I remember seeing him squirm every time he was getting an award, and he would eschew all of this discussion about him because it was never about him. It was always about the work and about the people. But it is appropriate for us. And those of us who were fortunate enough to have shared how much Michael meant to us when he was with us, it is very appropriate for us to tell stories for folks that weren't in such proximity that really help put a line around the extraordinary character, the extraordinary vision that Michael had and that he was. Really, Abby, thank you so much. This is a wonderful representation of some of the pieces that are laid out. And I would like to move on and introduce another dear friend and colleague, Rachel Miracle.
Thank you so much, Vince, and everyone. It's really moving to be here with you all. I started as a baby lawyer at CCR straight out of law school, and I had the immense honor to work with Michael on Guantanamo and some of the other national security cases. I just want to talk a little bit about what Michael taught me in those early years. He taught me to trust myself, law school doesn't teach you much about how to be a lawyer, especially a lawyer who cares about justice. And Michael didn't seem to care or notice that I had no idea what I was doing when I started at CCR. I remember so clearly my second day on the job in September of 2002. And I was probably still trying to figure out how to log into my email or something like that. And Michael strode by the room where I was sitting and in passing asked me if I had been following that summer's revelations about the secret Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and its rubber stamp approach to authorizing the surveillance of US citizens. I had a vague idea what he was talking about, and so I nodded. Yeah, I'd heard about it. And he responded that it was an outrage and said, figure out how to challenge it, Rachel, and we'll talk soon. And then he walked off. I mean, at that point, I could have as easier figured out how to fly as how to bring a case of that nature. But Michael believed that I was qualified to dig into something like that on day 2 at the job. And so I got to work. And Michael did this for me again and again. Probably a year or 2 later, when I still hadn't figured out how to challenge the existence of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, CCR learned that the ACLU was bringing some of our clients, the family members of Guantanamo detainees, to DC to lobby Congress to end the detentions. And we insisted that a CCR attorney be along on that trip to protect our clients' legal interests before the media and the legislators. And I was tapped to go. Again, I had no idea what I was doing on this trip with all these much more experienced people. But Michael believed that young lawyers, new lawyers, had just as much to offer and gain from such experiences as more experienced lawyers. Michael cared deeply, not only about giving new lawyers mentorship, but about giving us opportunities. And his leadership in that area and his strength as a fundraiser in that area is such a huge part of why CCR now has such a robust fellowship and mentorship and internship program, and why Michael's 4 key principles must be taught to all lawyers and law students who pass through CCR's doors. Michael also taught me about kindness in the workplace. He gave gifts randomly for no reason. One day he stopped by my office to say hi, and we got into a conversation about the fact that I found litigation so intellectually challenging that I'd been reading young adult fiction in my downtime. It's funny, Ellen's remarks about his always wanting to know what people are reading. So there you go. And I explained that, you know, at the end of the day, my brain was just so tired that I couldn't handle anything harder than, you know, young adult fiction. A few days later, a package arrived for me at the office, and it was Philip Pullman's amazing young adult series, His Dark Materials, and I devoured it. And I long thought about how I wanted to be like that. I wanted to be the kind of person who would just give a coworker a present out of nowhere, just when I realized that they would enjoy it. But I never seemed to have the time to actually do that. And Michael, incredibly busy though he always was, would make that time for me and for so many other people. Wrapped up in what Michael taught me is what he taught us, what he taught CCR. He taught us that our job as radical lawyers is twofold. It is to represent movements, working with political and grassroots activists to ensure that litigation serves the struggle for justice, but it is also to stand alone when necessary, speak truth to power, stand up for what is right. In Moving the Bar, Michael talks about the importance of defending whistleblowers and hackers and how such work is a blow to imperialism. And I think that as radical lawyers, we are called on to use our privilege to stand in defense of people and communities on the move and to challenge power ourselves, using creative cases, using outlandish theories to demonstrate the injustice of what is going on. Once, after a particularly heartbreaking defeat in a case I had worked on for about a decade, Michael emailed me to share his condolences. And he praised my work on the case. And he said that losing important cases serves to give us a sense of how unjust our society is. His one-line email to me had less preposterous punctuation and spelling mistakes than his emails usually did, which I didn't notice at the time, but now I like to imagine it means that he took a little bit of time with it, thinking about how to console a young lawyer who wasn't yet used to losing. But losing is a part of what we do. In his book, Michael describes pushback that CCR experienced in its groundbreaking litigation in the 1980s on behalf of Nicaraguan civilians killed by the Contras, where others in the legal community were arguing that we needed to be more careful about the development of precedent and that losing a case of that nature could hurt others in the future. Michael wasn't afraid to push the envelope. In his words, he said, you know, those cases were an important way of focusing attention on US involvement in the US-backed Contra war, and that the killing was going on right now. Our clients are suffering right now. Who has the luxury to care about the development of precedent when people are dying? And if we lose, then at least we have contributed to the historical record. We have ensured that these atrocities are written down, that they are known. Michael taught me to trust my own creativity and strategy, to not fear losing, to find the people I love and work with them, to call lies, lies, and to stand up to power even when I'm afraid. Reading his book helped me understand that not all these things came naturally or easily to him. He too struggled. His openness in his book about his missteps, his mistakes, his periods of depression, his vulnerability are lessons for all of us to take into CCR's next decades. Reading about parts of Michael's life that I didn't know anything about is a gift. I got to spend another few days with a dear colleague who was gone way too soon. And I got to learn more about the organization that I considered home for nearly 20 years now. We at CCR will continue to change and evolve as Michael himself did, but we cannot stray from his 4 principles. We do not refuse to take a case just because we are unlikely to win. We use cases to promote a radical critique of the United States and to promote revolutionary transformation. We combine legal work with political advocacy, and we love people. That's what Michael taught me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have to speak up. Sorry, thank you so much for that, Rachel. It was very touching. And as we look at the screen that Abby is going to share with us, I would note a couple of things. Number one, that your story from your perspective as a young lawyer to a lawyer now is striking in the sense that you embody all of those things that Michael taught you with your colleagues daily, including the giving of random gifts for people in need, for which that is very much appreciated. And thank you for lifting that piece up. It's an extraordinary testament to him. Thank you very much. Folks, we're gonna move to a question and answer period. I just wanna note we are gonna end promptly at 3 o'clock, number one. So I would invite you to, when you look on your Zoom screen, all the way to the right or close to the right, you'll see, oh, mine just went away. You'll see a Q&A button. So you can click on that, and that would be a great way to ask some questions of the folks that we're speaking today. I want to acknowledge that there are many extraordinary people and longtime friends and colleagues in the Zoom room who will not be able to share stories, and we'll have to figure out a time when we can all get together and do that. But for now, maybe there are questions that you have from the perspectives of the folks that were speaking that you might want to share. And while we're waiting for the questions in the Q&A button, which is in the middle of the bottom, I'm understanding that it says Q&A. I wanted to just to get a quick reflection from Ellen Bahar and Rachel on what's one thing that you think most people don't know about Michael? I'll start off. I was shocked that someone that has such political clarity and vision has the worst sense of direction that I've ever seen. Being standing on a street corner, and he just didn't know which way to turn, but I would follow him no matter which direction he went. Any other reflections?
I love that. That makes me feel better about my own terrible sense of direction. And now that I know it's something else I share with Michael, I'm not going to feel ashamed of it anymore. Just how silly he was, how wonderful with children, and how much he enjoyed just being silly, with his friends and family.
And I mentioned all the skulls. I remember when I first went to his house for the first time, to see all those animal skulls, it just wouldn't have hit people that Michael would be that much, not only into the outdoors, but into collecting various animal skulls.
Maybe people know this, but it was always surprising to me when he would come in the office and he'd hear about some case we brought, some victory we had, and he'd open his mouth up so wide, put his hand over his mouth and yell, "That's amazing," as if he were a second-year law student and not one of the most accomplished human rights lawyers in the world. Just his joyousness and support was boundless, like that every one of these things was like the first time.
You know, I actually want to add one more thing, which always surprised me. I came to CCR, I was a criminal defense lawyer. I didn't know the first thing about filing an international human rights case. And he just revered people who could do criminal defense trials. And I never quite understood that till much later on, when I realized he would talk about how scary it was to him to have somebody's life, you know, in your hands. You're responsible for whether they go to jail or not. And he seemed responsible for so much more.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely, I picked up on that as well. And he did tell stories about being thrust into a criminal trial really very early in his career. I think it might have been one of the Panther 21. I'd have to sort of go back to the book and check. But there, you know, there was a sense of it was in his depth in so many different ways. And there was something about doing criminal defense that I think, at least as he talked to me about it, was next to godliness in terms of the legal field, which was incredible. So here's a question from, a couple of questions in the Q&A now, which we can address. I'll just sort of throw them out, and we'll try to provide short answers to them. One is, how did Michael, from Ann Wilcox, how did Michael Ratner reach out to and mentor students and young lawyers? And the other one is from Catherine Podogil. Apologies if I mispronounce your name. What is the status of Guantanamo at this point? Is it even likely that the administration will address the closing, which was promised back when Obama was campaigning? Catherine, we've had 20 years of that question. But folks, Michael, how did he reach out to young lawyers, and status of Guantanamo?
So I would start by saying he just expected us to do the work. You know, he would call and he would reach out and you know, talk to us about something we were working on, and then we were supposed to do the work. And he was there if you had a question, if you needed help, if you needed advice. But his expectation that we would figure it out, that we had the capability to do it, and that, you know, what we would come up with would be just as worthy and just as important to the team as anything he would come up with himself. And you see that throughout his book as he's writing about, you know, his work with various young lawyers. I think he talked about working with Kerry at one point on Julian Assange's case, and how, you know, he eventually turned over a bunch of his work to Kerry, who just replaced him, you know, as if we all had the same capability and an aptitude for this that he did. That's what he saw in all of us and expected of all of us, even when we hadn't really had a chance to develop that yet. And because he believed in us, we learned to believe in ourselves.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Rachel, I wasn't as young as you were, I think, when I started, but I was relatively young and I had the same experience. It is also true that once I started teaching and I would invite Michael to come to Cardozo, he always said yes. He always talked to students. He loved teaching students. He was just a magnet for so many students around the country who wanted to do international human rights work, and he helped them in any way that he could.
So I can answer the Guantanamo question, but just echoing that, I think that's really one of the additionally remarkable things about Michael, how much he loved being around young people and sharing as almost a co-equal. I mean, we'd sort of go to events and it'd be 1 a.m, it's time to go home, and Michael still had a crowd of, you know, 10 young people around him, sort of boundless energy around the next generation. As for Guantanamo, yes, it's still open. We do expect significant steps by the Biden administration to release detainees and close Guantanamo. It is happening as we speak. Actually, just today, one of our clients has been what's called cleared for release by an administrative process. I think one difference between Biden and Obama is he will do it far more under the radar than Obama did, so as to avoid the kind of right-wing national security backlash that Obama faced. But so we're optimistic and continue to put a lot of pressure on the Biden administration to start releasing detainees and ultimately closing Guantanamo once and for all, so that then we can start working even more deeply on accountability for the war crimes that happen there and elsewhere.
Thank you so much for that. And I just want to commend folks to the chat. There are some wonderful tributes coming in from clients and former students and colleagues and friends that are doing a really great job of capturing what Michael meant to all of us on this community. So thank you all for those incredible remembrances. Sandy, I have tears in my eyes as well. It's a very emotional experience. There's here's an interesting question. I'm wondering if, from Doug, I'm wondering if were human or civil rights cases that Michael declined to pursue, and what the circumstances that moved him to decline them. I don't know the specific answer to that, but I think the thing with CCR is that there are always many more cases that we decline than the ones that we pursue. But I'm curious if people have particular memories of things that he's like, heck no, we're not doing that.
Well, there were many. Look, I was back in the days when we were called a scrappy bunch of something lawyers. I mean, you're much more of an organization now, shall we say, than what we were back then. And this whole question of taking on criminal defense cases was quite controversial. And CCR generally did not do that. I mean, you just mentioned the Central Park jogger case, that's one. There were numbers of other cases like that after lengthy debates, I would often disagree with him because I thought we should do those cases, but there were some of those as well.
Yes, the Central Park 5 case was, this is before Rachel and Bahar in my time, but that was definitely one of the cases that there was fierce debates about at the center, and that the center declined to do. Ironically enough, in my years before coming to the center as an intern, I worked as a paralegal on that case before going to law school. And for those of you who don't remember, when you tell the story backwards, it is a clear manifestation of the age-old criminalization and demonization of Black people, Black men in particular, around sexual assault and rape of white women. When you tell that story forward at the time, it was a case that actually split the left in some interesting ways, as far as I understand, as far as I remember. And I think Michael said to me that one of his, I don't know if I would call it a regret, but one of the things that he said was that looking back on that, that's probably a case that the center should have taken. We don't always get it right, and we don't hold, it's unfair to hold people to that high standard of, even with the best vision in the world, sometimes we don't, and we can't take on the things that in hindsight we should have. But always, and to this day, by the way, very vibrant debates around the politics of a range of cases that CCR works on.
Vince, could I just say something very quickly? I want to acknowledge the comment from Christina from Bolivia and Michael's incredible work around the corona weavings that he managed to get from the United States and return to Bolivia. I had never heard that story, and I just want to let you know that it was incredibly important to him. I think that the first time Vince and I had ever heard about the story was on our last visit with him in his apartment. And that's one of the stories he most wanted to share with us. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you so much for that, Bahar. That's exactly right. It was the last visit that we had with him. And I remember his eyes were glowing.
Yep.
He was a little bit weak, and it was, I think, hard for him to sort of string it all together. But the energy, the passion, the excitement, he remembered it like it was yesterday. And this was a story that none of us had ever heard. And this was the the extraordinary generosity and kindness and heart of Michael Ratner is that he didn't need an organization called the Center for Constitutional Rights for him to move forward and do the right things as he saw fit. I want to close us by acknowledging and thanking you all for joining us for this remembrance. It is both hard and wonderful. The hardest part about not having Michael in the room is not having Michael in the room. I think we just need to say it. And it is wonderful to be with you and my dear colleagues who had the opportunity to speak today, to remember him, but not in a way that we lionize fallen heroes, but in ways that we remember and hold with us family members. And that's what it felt like for me today. And I hope that it felt like that for you. I hope that your spirits are lifted up and that you're inspired to do the thing that you didn't have the courage to do before this call. I hope that you are being critical of the state and being critical of your own desire to have things work out just by the government alone, and that your thoughts of the people are elevated and motivate you in your actions. And I want to close by just referencing a story that I was privileged to ask, that Karen asked me to tell at Michael's memorial service, which is the story of Sisyphus. And at least during the Guantanamo years, you couldn't go a day without Michael making a reference to that this is just like Sisyphus, Sisyphus being sort of sentenced to pulling this rock up, pushing this rock up a hill for the rest of your life. And I think he was speaking about that to describe, the Sisyphean task, the hardest thing that you could possibly do forever and ultimately be futile because the rock would just roll down the hill. But, when I think about the Sisyphus story, as I was mentioning earlier, that Michael was a genius at speaking to the political context and not just the facts. And the political context of the myth of Sisyphus is that Sisyphus wasn't just a poor schlep that just ended up on, the downward side of a rock. Sisyphus was someone who cheated death, as the story goes, twice. And he was so cunning and smart that death couldn't catch him, and it angered the gods. It angered Zeus. And so Zeus sentenced him to this life of futility. And it can't, the political context becomes important, because otherwise you just think that Sisyphus is just poor me and my labor. But what Sisyphus is a story about, it's about how people challenge power and how power strikes back. And if Sisyphus needed a lawyer, and if Michael was around there, then there's no doubt in my mind that Michael would have said, "May it please the court, this is Michael Ratner on behalf of the Center for Constitutional Rights, representing Sisyphus in one of the most egregious, overstepping powers of repression that the gods have done to date. We cannot let this stand." So I want to leave you with that. And thank you all so much for coming. And yes, if please consider being a justice sustainer at CCR. We would love to be able to send you this book. Everybody that signs up as a justice sustainer will get a copy. It's an extraordinary book. It is 1,000 times better than the stories that we can tell here. And it will bring you closer to the person that Michael was for us and the person that we need within us to be able to move forward.
So Vince, can I just add one thing to thank Michael Smith and Zach Sklar for working so hard to produce this terrific book.
Yes, thank you so much.
I think we're going to kick it over to Amy. Abby?
Oh, sorry, we're going to kick it to Abby. Yes, oh my apologies. Abby, I got carried away. Can you share your screen so folks can just take some of these images with them?
For justice, thunders condemnation, for a better world since birth. No more traditions change shall bind us, arise you slaves, no more in thrall. The earth shall rise on new foundations, we have been lost, we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in his place. The international Soviet shall be the human race. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in his place. The international Soviet shall be the human race. We want no condescending saviors to rule us from a judgment hall. We workers ask not for their favors, let us consult for all. To make the fleet scorch his booty, to free the spirit from your cell. We must ourselves decide our duty, we must decide and do it well. 'Tis the